Another round of spray is going on this vibrant canola crop on Mark Fowler's farm. But this year, he received a worrying email from Western Australia's largest grain buyer, CBH Group. It warned that all canola growers accredited with Europe's International Sustainability and Carbon Certification Program would soon have to change how they farm. The ICC wanted them to phase out a chemical called omethoate, used to kill insects, mites and aphids.
I was quite shocked and alarmed. I'd sprayed omethoate over quite a lot of our canola at this stage and over pastures, and had a number of sale contracts for the sale of ICC accredited canola, and I asked myself the question, how can I satisfy those contracts? Thankfully, when I made some inquiries, I learned from CBH that there would be an amnesty period up until the 1st January 2023.
Being part of the European Sustainability Scheme is valuable. It gives growers a $10 a tonne bonus.
And the critical bit of that is that it's not just as it applies to the canola that you're selling into that market, it's across your whole farming operation.
Europe has banned omethoate because the World Health Organisation classifies it as a moderately hazardous chemical. But it's allowed in Australia by regulator Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority.
So it feels a bit like Europe's trying to impose its own standards on us, which is disappointing because the weather and the soil that we have here is quite different to Europe.
Europe is the #1 customer for Australian canola, and they prefer canola which is not genetically modified. That gives Australian farmers an edge over their biggest competitor, Canada, because it grows only GM canola. The Europeans sometimes pay up to $100 a tonne over the GM varieties.
Over the last decade, something like more than two-thirds of Australian exports have all gone to Europe, and in fact in some years it's been as high as 90%. So it's a core market for Australian canola growers, and particularly Western Australia. So the Australian canola is used in Europe for biodiesel. A bit of irony there that we grow a great food product, but it is going into biodiesel. And one of the reasons they prefer canola is it's demonstrated that it's grown sustainably.
The ICC scheme was adopted after the European Union mandated that all biofuels companies must meet a renewable energy directive. This includes proving that their entire supply chain is sustainable.
So they're looking at a range of criteria within the European Renewable Energy Directive, primarily around the use of land to make sure that the land has not been cleared, that the farmer is using correct, appropriate methods for farming, safe methods for workers, that chemicals are being used in the appropriate manner.
Next to the famous sunflowers in France, canola is the most photographed crop in the world. But what most people don't realise is it's a really tough plant to grow and requires quite a bit of management from a range of chemicals. But the challenge for farmers is that there's just not that many alternative methods for controlling pests and weeds.
Yeah, look, omethoate is a post-emergent insecticide that's commonly used against a number of species, particularly red-legged earth mites, but some other mite species, aphids, and also something called the lucerne flea. Some of these species can be certainly very damaging. That species, the red-legged earth mite, would cause several $100 million in damages each year.
Professor Paul Umina says omethoate is important, but not irreplaceable.
There would be certainly impacts. If omethoate was lost, there would absolutely be impacts, but I don't think it would be catastrophic. We've already seen farmers having to adapt to the loss of chemistries for quite some time, and including omethoate.
But farmers fear banning omethoate could be the first step in restricting their use of other important chemicals they need, like the weed killer Roundup, also known as glyphosate. We've got glyphosate over here.
We've got regular strength and the stuff that we together with a different formulation of strength and the stuff that we have to use on our Roundup Ready canola.
What's the broader issue here? Do you think you'll get to the point where Europe may demand that you stop using something like, for example, glyphosate?
Oh, look, I think that is the concern. We think that what is sustainable in Europe isn't necessarily as sustainable here. Take, for example, France and Germany, who have legislated to ban the use of glyphosate. In Australia, We have a climate and we have soils which are quite different to in Europe. Our minimum tillage system has been absolutely critical in enabling us to achieve productivity gains in the face of a drying climate. And glyphosate is an absolutely critical part of that. If we didn't have access to some of that key chemistry, particularly organophosphates to control insects in canola, then we probably would struggle to grow canola here.
Pest experts agree.
So if we were to lose chemistries like neonicotinoids, that would absolutely have a pretty significant impact on how we go about controlling and managing some of these species.
The push for sustainable accreditation is not just affecting canola. International buyers are starting to demand other crops become certified.
We're talking about barley that's grown in Western Australia, malted in Perth, and which is ultimately sent to Australian and Southeast Asian markets. And we're going to certify it in accordance with a standard that's set in Germany. You know, it does seem slightly absurd.
This canola crop is not genetically modified, and that's exactly what the Europeans want. And it gives us an advantage in the international market. It's also a very valuable crop for Australian farmers because it offers a break from their staple wheat and barley crops, which is good for the soil. It also helps them diversify their income and diversify all the chemicals that they use, which is just generally good for the overall ecosystem. But there's a fine line here between the Europeans getting the product that they want and putting at risk the Australian industry, which provides it.
If that chemistry was banned and we couldn't find any other alternatives, then we'd probably choose not to supply that market. And without that Europe premium of up to $100, I suspect most growers, certainly we would go to exclusively growing GM canola.
For the industry, they'll be working hard to overturn the Europeans' demands.
We've got the opportunity and the potential to be able to demonstrate to ISCC that this is an essential part of integrated pest management within Australia, and therefore, while it's not a desirable chemical from their perspective, they also appreciate that sometimes these chemicals are just essential within a farming system.
Is Australia out of step with Europe and the rest of the world on this issue?
No, I don't think we are. But we need to be actively promoting our concept of sustainability to our markets, and that involves explaining and telling the story about how minimum tillage practices has transformed agriculture in Australia, how it has enabled productivity gains, serious productivity gains, in the face of a drying climate. So for us, the use of that key chemistry is a fundamental part of remaining sustainable.